Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're venturing into a really captivating area, Jewish magic in the Middle Ages.
That's right. And we're doing this based on the source you provided, jewishmagicproof.pdf.
Exactly. And it's maybe a surprising topic for some.
It can be. It really broadens how we think about medieval Jewish life.
Hmm.
It's not just about religious law or, unfortunately, persecution.
Right. It gives us this window into their whole worldview regarding the unseen, demons, angels.
A much more intricate reality than we sometimes assume.
And for you listening, especially if you like to get the core insights quickly, that's our goal. We want to pull out the really fascinating bits, those aha moments from this document.
Without getting bogged down in every single detail, yeah? Giving you the essence of it.
So we'll be looking at their beliefs about demons, angels, definitely.
And the practices that came with that, amulets, incantations, things like that.
Divination, too, trying to see the future and how all this stuff sort of intersected with everyday life.
And their interactions with the non-Jewish world around them. That's a key part of the context.
Okay, and just so you know where this info comes from, the source itself is scholarly. It draws on really core texts.
Yeah, things like the Talmud, which is central, obviously, and the Geonic tradition that followed.
Plus other medieval Jewish writings.
And it's important, I think, to remember the backdrop. You've got medieval Jewish communities often caught between, harsh anti-Semitism on one side.
And maybe overly sanitized religious pictures on the other.
Exactly. So we're trying to find the nuances, the reality of their beliefs about magic right in the middle of all that.
Okay, let's dive in. Where should we start? Maybe the spirit world itself. Demons.
Sounds good. Because one thing that's immediately clear from the source is that belief in demons wasn't really optional. It was pretty much axiomatic.
Like, just accepted. Part of the furniture of the world.
Precisely. The text emphasizes that. There wasn't really any debate about if evil spirits existed. It was just assumed, woven through the Talmud, both the stories, the Agadah, and the legal parts, the halacha.
So for people immersed in those texts, demons were just real.
A given, a framework for how things worked.
And they had characteristics, right? They weren't just vague blobs of evil.
No, the source gets specific. They were seen as occupying this middle ground between angels and men.
Yeah.
They had wings like angels, could move around freely.
And the boundaries were kind of fluid between human, animal, spirit.
That's a fascinating point the source makes, yeah. The lines weren't hard and fast. Transformations were possible.
So angels or demons could look like people or animals?
Or even humans transforming. The source mentions spirits inhabiting dog skins, for instance. It's a very different conception of the natural order.
Wow, dog skins. Okay. And these demons weren't just theoretical, they were seen as actual threats.
Oh, definitely. Very real, tangible threats in daily life.
Yeah.
The text lists things like inhabiting empty houses.
Right. Don't go into the abandoned house.
Exactly. Causing death, attacking people in their sleep.
Sleep seems key, because the soul was thought to wander then.
That was the belief, yeah. The soul leaves the body, making you vulnerable.
So people took precautions.
They did.
Mm.
The source mentions being careful when building new houses, avoiding certain types of land.
Maybe building with wood instead of stone, because stone felt too permanent, attracting spirits.
That suggested yes. And reciting specific psalms, anti-demonic psalms, before sleeping.
And being extra careful around the sick or dying.
Mm-hmm. They were seen as especially susceptible.
It's also interesting how these ideas evolved. The source mentions a shift from older Talmudic demons.
Yeah, to spirits with non-Hebrew names. German or French names start appearing.
Which shows cultural mixing, right?
Absolutely. This linguistic borrowing is really significant. It shows Jewish communities were interacting with and integrating local folklore into their own understanding. It wasn't static.
And we get examples like Keteb Mariri, the demon of summer heat.
Yes, personifying the oppressive midday heat and the estry.
That sounds like a vampire or witch figure.
Sort of. The source notes it's a bit ambiguous. Sometimes a spirit, sometimes a flesh and blood woman with, vampiric tendencies. That blend is common in folklore, isn't it?
True. The source also mentions a possible link to Germanic figures like Perchta, but says it's probably just a coincidence linguistically.
Right. A good reminder not to jump to conclusions about connections.
So, okay, you've got these threats. How did people understand attacks happening, and more importantly, how did they defend themselves?
Well, a key idea was that demons usually only harmed you if you sort of bothered them.
Like trying to conjure them or boss them around.
Exactly. Provocation. Though, as we said, some situations like sleep were just inherently risky.
And then there's the evil eye. I was surprised the source mentions 2 types.
Yeah, that's interesting. One type was seen as like an inherent quality. Some people just had a harmful gaze,
Wow.
naturally destructive.
Wow. Okay.
The other type, linked to those German words berufen or beschreien, was more about envy.
Like if someone envied your good fortune, that itself could cause harm. Almost like the spirit's begrudged happiness.
That seems to be the idea, yeah. And rabbinic tradition was aware of both kinds.
Words themselves carried weight too, it seems. Curses, excommunication.
Absolutely fundamental. The power of speech, for good or ill, curses were taken incredibly seriously.
And excommunication must have been terrifying.
Immense consequences, yeah. Cut off socially, spiritually. A really big deal.
And this fear of spirits shaped death rituals too. Not reusing clothes, burying quickly.
Definitely. The whole process around death was seen as spiritually dangerous. Spirits accompanying the body, cemeteries being full of them.
The spirit of the deceased may be lingering.
All these anxieties fed into the rituals. Even things like washing hands after visiting a cemetery could look suspicious, like sorcery, to outsiders. It highlights that delicate position they were often in.
So what about defenses? What could people actually do?
Well, there were religious approaches, first and foremost. Prayer was huge. Specific ones like the Yozervich or the 18 benedictions were seen as protective.
And observing the Sabbath.
Crucial. And things like the Waknot, that vigil before circumcision, staying up all night, praying, studying.
The spiritual guard duty almost.
Pretty much, yeah. Protecting the child during that vulnerable transition.
And then more, let's say, explicitly magical defenses.
Right. Invoking angels, using specific incantations.
Yeah.
The source gives that example of Psalm 10 with mystical names for someone thought to be possessed.
And some more maybe folk magic stuff. Rattling nuts in the outhouse.
Yeah, to scare demons away.
Yeah.
Or striking water vessels before drinking.
Even gestures, like the fig sign.
Symbolic gestures to ward off evil, yes.
Wow.
It's a real mix of formal religion and popular practices.
Offerings seem part of it too, like the kapara, right? The scapegoat idea.
That's a big one. And even accidentally, like killing a weasel that knocked over a pot, could be seen as an offering.
And Elijah's chair at circumcisions.
Connected to the legend that Elijah attends every circumcision, it beautifully ties together religious legend and this protective, maybe magical element.
Even wedding traditions, like carrying torches or breaking a glass.
Those also had roots and beliefs about driving away or appeasing spirits during important life moments.
Okay, so we've looked at the darker side, the demons. Let's shift to the light angels and divine names. They were central to the magic, weren't they?
Absolutely central. Angels were seen as God's agents, God's deputies. The spiritual world was packed with them.
And they weren't just hanging around, they did stuff.
Oh, yeah. Guides, guardians, representatives in the heavenly court. They could even prompt action on earth.
And later, Kabbalah adds even more layers to this, right? More complex angel hierarchies.
Exactly. Kabbalistic angelology really expanded on these ideas.
And Hebrew seems important here. Even if a spell was written in German or French, the command to the angel was in Hebrew?
Typically, yes. It underscores the sacredness of the language for communicating with the divine. Angels were the intermediaries, keeping God connected to the world.
But here's an interesting twist from the source. The divine name itself seemed even more powerful than individual angels.
That's a really key point. There's a subtle shift. While angels are important, the ultimate power source is God's name itself.
So knowing and using the right names became the focus.
Increasingly, yes. It led to this, proliferation of angelic names, but the divine name was paramount. Its potency overshadowed individual angels in a way.
And this connects to beliefs about personal names, too. That your name could shape your fate.
For sure. Naming customs often reflected that. You'd avoid names associated with bad luck, maybe name a child after a successful relative.
And this wasn't just about angel names. God's name itself was thought to have inherent magical power.
Autonomous power, yeah.
Yeah.
It could work on its own in magical contexts.
So it sounds like a move from appealing to beings.
Towards manipulating names and words themselves. That's a crucial development.
A focus on the language, the formula.
Exactly. Medieval Jews might say they were invoking beings, but the practice often centered on using the right names, the right formulas, sometimes called nominalism.
But you couldn't just toss these names around, right? Purity was important.
Vitally important. Ritual purity. The right intention. The source mentions sanctification, things like abstinence, special diets, fasting before using holy names.
Because misuse could be bad. or just ineffective?
Both, potentially. And there were debates about this, theological arguments. The source mentions Zalman Zevi defending his use of names against accusations.
We also see borrowed names coming in again. Babylonian, Egyptian, Greek influences.
Yeah, that cultural exchange again. Divine titles from Babylon, those barbarous syllables from Egypt thought to hold power, even Greek words like PP finding their way in.
Sometimes Hebraized to fit them in.
Right, integrated into this system.
And then there are those really mystical names, the 42-letter name, the 72-letter name of God.
Huge mystical significance. Believed to hold immense power, derived through complex interpretations of Scripture. The 42-letter one supposedly from the first letters of Genesis.
It's also fascinating how everyday religious items started to take on magical properties, like the mezuzah.
Definitely. The mezuzah, the commandment to put Scripture on your doorpost, also became seen as a protective amulet.
Or specific Bible verses, Psalms.
Yes, the deep engagement with the Bible made this almost natural. Certain verses or whole psalms were used as charms for all sorts of things. Protection, good dreams, you name it.
And timing mattered, like doing magic before sunrise or after Havdalah.
Specific times were often considered more auspicious, yes. And small details, like identifying people in spells by their mother's name, that hints at maybe older matrilineal traces or different ideas about spiritual identity.
And gematria using the number values of Hebrew letters.
Another layer.
Mm.
Creating magical names where the letters added up to a significant number. It added symbolic weight, potency.
So we have this complex world of spirits, names, prayers. How did it look in practice? Amulets seem like a big part of it.
A very big and, importantly, often officially accepted part. Amulets for healing, for protection, these were generally okay.
And they had preferred materials, like deerskin?
Yes, kosher parchment, ideally from a deer. There were rituals for writing them, blessings, specific auspicious times.
And even regular religious items like tefillin or mezuzot could become amulets.
People would add names of God or angels, magical symbols, to enhance their protective power, sort of layering magic onto religion.
Well, not everyone was on board with that. Some rabbis pushed back.
Right. The idea of a magical mezuzah became controversial. Some authorities worried it blurred the lines too much, moving from piety to sorcery.
The source mentions number squares too, and the significance of numbers like 5 linked to God's name.
Yes, the number 5, He in Hebrew, often representing the Tetragrammaton, and 15 for Yah, these added mystical power drawing on numerology.
And magic wasn't just written down. People consumed things.
Sometimes, yeah. Writing spells on leaves, soaking them in water, then drinking it or washing with it. Image magic, too, inscriptions on figures.
But sympathetic magic, like using hair or nail clippings, was maybe less common in Jewish practice than elsewhere in Europe.
The source suggests that, yes, while the principle was known, using actual human or animal parts seems less frequent. They might use inscribed stones, or even the afikomen from Passover.
The leftover matzah from the Seder, used as an amulet.
Apparently so, relying more on ritually significant objects.
And again, borrowing from neighbors, using an animal's eye for luck, henbane in court.
That pattern keeps popping up. Even specific charms like the Nothamin or St. George's shirt, the kind of magical garment, were sometimes adopted. And gemstones, too, believed to have powers.
The source even gives a formula for an amulet, right?
It does, which really gives you a concrete sense of how these were put together.
All right, let's shift again. What about the future? How did they try to know what was coming? Divination?
Well, the underlying idea was that what happens in heaven can be known on earth. This interconnectedness, microcosm and macrocosm.
Astrology seems huge here.
Very significant. Planetary influences, constellations, predicting weather, figuring out good or bad times for, well, almost anything.
Like bloodletting. When was a good time for that?
Astrology would offer guidance on that, yes.
And some stranger beliefs, too, like reflections showing death.
That's a striking one. The idea that a dying person's reflection might look different, eyes and mouth closed, even before they pass, shows that thin veil between worlds again.
And bibliomancy, just flipping open the Bible.
Randomly opening it and taking meaning from the first verse you see. Or interpreting verses that just came to mind.
But there are more technical methods, too. Anthroposcopy, chiromancy.
Right, reading fortunes from physical features or palm lines. More systematic approaches.
Scrying, like crystal gazing.
Using fingernails, bowls of water, polished stones, gazing into them for visions.
What about necromancy? Talking to the dead. That sounds controversial.
It was generally frowned upon by rabbis, yeah. Concerns about idolatry, misuse. But the source says it did happen sometimes.
Maybe deals made with dying people? Rituals at graves.
Things like that. But it seems to have been less common because of the official disapproval.
Using hazel rods to find treasure that sounds like something borrowed from German folklore.
The source points to that, yeah. Another example of cultural borrowing.
And ordeals. Trial by blood were those used.
Very rarely in Jewish communities, it seems. Relying on supernatural judgment like that was mostly outside their legal traditions.
Dreams, though, those are important, right? A 60th part of prophecy.
Definitely seen as a potential channel for divine messages, or sometimes reflecting your physical state, or this vigor of the soul idea, kind of mini prophecy during sleep.
And interpreting them was a big deal, using symbols, puns, numbers.
Absolutely. A whole system for interpretation. And ways to counteract bad dreams, fasting, reciting verses, specific rituals to release the dream's negative power.
Because the interpretation itself could shape the outcome.
That was the Talmudic idea, yes.
Yeah.
All dreams follow their interpretation. So understanding them and responding correctly was crucial.
Can we circle back to astrology for a sec? The source had more details there.
Sure. It mentions specific angels linked to planets. Different lists existed, actually. Archangels tied to zodiac signs and months.
Predicting lifespan based on planets, weather forecasting.
All part of it. Using the sun, solstices to predict weather, and mapping out those auspicious and inauspicious times for everything: work, marriage, moving house.
Lunar influence, too.
Big time. Affecting the brain, harvested crops, marriage, conception, even linking solstices and equinoxes to folk beliefs, like water becoming unsafe during the Takufet.
Okay, almost wrapping up. The source had that appendix on forming magical names, specific techniques.
Right. It breaks down a few methods. Notaricon using initials, like Agla from a biblical phrase.
Tamura.
Yeah.
Swapping letters around.
Exactly. Permutations, Saruf combining letters,
Yeah.
like from the Song of Songs. Gematria, which we mentioned, the number values.
And just borrowing foreign words and Hebraizing them.
That too. The source gives examples like how might come from Exodus. Using these techniques, it shows how intricate this linguistic magic could be.
And a bit on gems, too.
Yeah, a quick overview of magical properties attributed to different gemstones, drawing on commentators like Paya B. Asher, another facet of this belief system.
Wow. Okay, we have definitely covered a lot of ground here, really diving into this PDF.
It's clear, isn't it? Medieval Jewish magic was this incredibly rich, complex world, not separate from religion, but woven right into it in a daily life.
Yeah, you really see the constant belief in spirits, the need for defenses, the mix of formal tradition and folk practices.
And that constant interaction with surrounding cultures. Borrowing, adapting.
Some of those details really stick with you. The German charms finding their way in, the Grimm interpretations, how they built those magical names.
Those are definitely the aha moments that challenge simpler pictures.
And like you said, this deep dive just scratches the surface. The source itself has much more.
Absolutely. For anyone whose interest is piqued, there's plenty more to explore there.
So for you, the learner, maybe a final thought to chew on. Think about how different societies across time have tried to make sense of and maybe influence the unseen.
Yeah, what connects the world we explored today to how people think now? What's changed, what maybe hasn't? It's a fascinating question.
Indeed it is. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.